Hey everybody, I'm your host, Amin Dhillon, and today on this episode, I'm sitting down with Madison Ranta, who is the president of the Liberal Party of Canada, Prince Edward Island. Madison, thanks so much for being on the show. How are ya?
Hi, Amin. Thanks so much for having me this afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm 1 hour ahead, I think, of you in Prince Edward Island, speaking with you this afternoon, but great to be speaking with you and getting out to chat with more young liberals and women, and looking forward to seeing kind of where our conversation goes.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. So I opened up by saying a very fancy title for you, President of the Liberal Party of Canada, Prince Edward Island. So again, that's a lot to be proud of to have that position. We're going to get into that position in a little bit. First, let's talk about your journey into politics. So can you take us back? What got you interested in the first place?
Sure. So I guess I really have, whether to, depending, I guess, on what your view is, whether to thank her or to blame her. I have Patty Haidu from Thunder Bay Superior North, or the Member of Parliament and the Minister, to kind of thank for getting my involvement in the Liberal Party and in politics, kind of getting my foot in the door. It would have been, I think, maybe back in December of 2014, like really just leading up to that 2015 federal election, feeling that momentum building and wanting to get involved. I was lucky that she kind of just knew I was interested in politics and was willing to make that connection and reach out and say, hey, I'm looking for people who are interested in, getting involved and, want to make a difference and are passionate about, politics. And it seemed like a great fit. And so that was, I guess, almost 10 years ago now. And through a few different moves, further and further out east, I've kind of kept involved with the Liberal Party the whole way. And so I was just really fortunate when the opportunity came up, to serve kind of in that president role for the Liberal Party of Canada. We call it the Provincial Territorial Board, or the PTB, as a short acronym. I know everybody doesn't have enough acronyms to try and keep track of, but I was just really fortunate that the opportunity came up last year, kind of in the spring of last year. So I'm maybe a year and a half into the role now, and just feeling really privileged to be able to represent island liberals on that national board level. And looking forward to, we have a national board meeting coming up in December that I'm looking forward to seeing all my colleagues in person for the first time since March at the Federal Leadership Convention. So I'm looking forward to that. But I guess, yeah, that's kind of to give you the Coles Notes version of kind of how I first got involved with the politics and the Liberal Party kind of at the same time, back almost 10 years ago now. And I've kind of just kept it up because and I'm sure we'll get it more into it with our conversation, just certain things that I've really enjoyed about my involvement with the party that I haven't found a reason or a desire to step away, or I've kind of kept involved the whole way through.
Was there a defining moment that led you to get involved into politics?
That's a great question. And I think um, it might have been a lot of kind of little things adding up. I think it wasn't like, from a small age, it wasn't like I was always interested in politics, but I think as I got older and kind of to that voting age where or at least I started to get more interested in what those issues were and what it meant to kind of be involved, and when you're becoming a young adult and learning what it means to be an engaged citizen, and and what matters to you. And part of that to me was, it was important, or when I found out that I had this passion for politics, wanting to make sure that I could find a way to be involved as a woman. And I'm sure you've probably found yourself in similar situations sometimes, Amin, where you're the only woman in the room. Not always, but sometimes it still happens. And so not being afraid, I guess, to be in that position, or still finding those allies who can kind of be in your corner, and being willing to have your back kind of in those moments, and also being able to not be if you are the first, not to be the only woman in that role, or to be able to kind of use that your foot in the door to lift other women up, or encourage more women to get in onto those, whether it's those executive board roles or volunteer roles, or just showing them that there's a place for you here.
Absolutely. So then it sounds like there wasn't a specific issue or anything that made you go, you know what, I'm not happy about this. I'm going to try to make a difference and get more involved. It was more of an interest.
I'd say so, or at least that for me, that was kind of how I first got interested in it. And I was really, I think, good timing that when I was kind of becoming, my first election that I was able to vote in was that 2015 federal election. And so getting or kind of on that, whether, that Justin Trudeau liberal wave, that was kind of my first involvement into it. And I know a lot of people are across the country, and Thunder Bay was no exception. It was a really exciting time to feel that momentum for change and seeing, what the at that time in 2015 what the Trudeau Liberals stood for, and in opposition to what the Harper Conservatives were at the time as well. And so it was just feeling that momentum and seeing what the platform was and what the changes that we wanted to bring in and how exciting that was. And I'll say, or being in school in Ottawa, or in that fall of 2015 for university, or it was it was such a incredible atmosphere. I'll never forget it. But just kind of that, or I've always found it fortunate that to keep that passion of, I know that was a while ago, that election, 10 years ago or so now, but that passion, or that excitement of how it feels to be able to make that positive change in your community and reach out to those members of your, whether it's your riding or federally or your district here on PEI provincially, and see what are the issues that are important to you and your community, and what's not working for you, and what could government do to make your life better or easier, in what different ways. Or I still find that excitement or that passion hasn't left me yet. Or even though from election to election, or things change, but I find too, especially within the Liberal Party, sitting on the national board or the provincial territorial board, to be able to connect with like-minded people who share those ideas and that passion for just wanting to improve your community and whether it's at the national level or more of a local level. Or I find that it's those it's a good community to be able to get connected with, I think.
You had mentioned Patty Haidu played a big role in getting you involved. So can you take us back? What were sort of your first experiences in the political world? Did you start off maybe being a volunteer, door knocking during an election, or was there a different role?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head, Amin. Or I started out, and I think to this day, what I have the most experience with in politics is door knocking, or getting out there. Or you're right, it was kind of back in the 2014 federal election, or 2015 federal election there, and you kind of mentioned with the door knocking experiences, and I think I've had a lot of experience, whether it's been in or Ontario, Nova Scotia, PEI, and I'm sure I'm going to be adding to the list, or I hope to add to that list. But being able to door knock on a lot of different campaigns federally, probably what I have the most experience with, and what I always kind of encourage people who are looking for ways to get involved, or don't discount the people who are out there, doing the door knocking. Or it's a great way to get involved and to make sure that you're meeting people from all different points of the campaign team, and especially people who are just passionate about their community in all different parts of life.
After being a volunteer and before becoming president, were there any other roles or positions you held in politics or with the Liberal Party?
It was a little bit of a mix or a blending of my involvement with the federal Liberal Party, and when I kind of moved out to the Atlantic Canadian provinces, are getting involved with the provincial parties there, whether it's the Nova Scotia Young Liberals. I had a little bit of involvement there when I was a student at Dalhousie University, and then once I finished school and moved further out east to go to or live in Charlottetown and kind of continue my involvement with the federal party. I had a few different, volunteer positions on when it was the 2019 federal election. I door knocked a bit with Andy Fillmore before he was mayor of Halifax, where he is currently now, but when he was still the MP for the riding of Halifax. Did a little bit of volunteering with his campaign there, and that's kind of what led me, after that federal campaign was over, to want to keep up my involvement with those same people, or keep it up. Got introduced to the provincial party there. But then once I moved out to PEI, got the opportunity to volunteer this past year on Sean Casey's federal re-election campaign in Charlottetown, which is great. When I was a student in Ottawa from 2015 through 2019, I had a little bit of an opportunity to volunteer as a young Liberal in MP Omar Algabra's office, or kind of at that time he was still a parliamentary secretary before he became a minister, but was really fortunate to have that opportunity to get to meet his team and him as well. He was a fantastic gentleman to be able to work with, and it gave me the opportunity to network on Parliament Hill and to see and meet so many other great Liberals, whether it was young Liberals, people on the Women's Commission, people on the federal team, or it was just a great opportunity. And so I've tried to keep up as many of those connections as I can as I've moved further east. But those are probably some of my, or thinking back on some of the highlights of my involvement, those are probably the ones that come to the top of mind.
Okay, so then let's talk about being president of the Liberal Party of Canada, Prince Edward Island. Like I said, it's very impressive. It's a role with a lot of responsibility. So talk to us a little bit about how you were able to get this role.
The way that I kind of got into the role was maybe different than some of my colleagues who live in our more populous provinces. Now, when I was approached, it would have been in early or spring of 2024, and so the mood federally for our party was maybe, especially I'll say in the Atlantic provinces, was different then than it is now. And so finding, to be honest, finding people to be involved in some of those positions was a little bit more difficult then than it is now, or when we were getting that momentum reinvigorated and that interest back kind of into our party. And with the whole, we saw that with the leadership this past spring. But and so back in maybe March of 2024, I was fortunate enough just to be approached by somebody from the party who said, we're looking for people to fill these roles for the Prince Edward Island Provincial Board. We're hoping that in recent months, where things have maybe fallen off a little bit in terms of engagement with our federal Liberal community on the island, we're hoping to find somebody who's willing to reach out to maybe disaffected members, or or make sure that connection between Ottawa and our local members on Prince Edward Island remains strong. And so I was willing to, or I was grateful that I was considered for the opportunity, and thought, what, I'm willing to take on the role. And I was fortunate that everything kind of worked out. And it was April of 2024, Sachet Mehra, president of the board of the Liberal Party of Canada, came out to PEI to visit with us in person for our AGM at the time. And it was great to have him there when our board was officially, are appointed in for the next season, or it'll be through till 2027 that we're in the position. So that's kind of I guess, how I came into the role. And then, of course, it's been really interesting being on the national board and being in this president role from spring of 2024 through till now, or the past year and a half. It's been, or just the attitude on, not just on PEI, but I don't want to speak with my colleagues in the other Atlantic provinces by any means, but I think it's been, no surprise to say, or I don't think I'm stepping out of line to say, the reinvigoration, or just having people interested or in the party, having candidates, running in some of these seats, or it was great to see the interest just kind of reinvigorated out here in Atlantic Canada this past year. And so where we may have not had as many, people are itching to step up into some of these volunteer positions in the past, I think that, and speaking colloquially with some of my other chairs or presidents across the Atlantic region, it seems to be a common theme that we've got more people reaching out to us to say, how can I get involved, as opposed to the other way around, which is great news and great to see. And hopefully we can keep it up.
So looking back, it sounds like you've had about a year or so as president. What is the number one achievement or accomplishment that you're super proud of?
That's a great question. And I think that the one that comes to mind, or to top of mind is probably working with my national board colleagues this past January. Or I'm thinking about that week from when our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepped down as leader of the Liberal Party and as Prime Minister, kind of that first week of January. Our national board team were fortunate to have such a incredible group of volunteers who are willing to step up, when when duty called, and when we really needed to figure out, okay, what are the next steps here, and how do we figure out a path forward in a really difficult time. People were willing to sit for 4 or 5 hour meetings into the evenings, and get it, that's what, or just do what had to be done to figure out a path forward, and make have really engaged in thoughtful discussions on what was the best, what were the best things, not just for the party, but when we're in government for the country, working with our team to try and figuring out what's the next steps from Trudeau's resignation to planning our date for our leadership convention in March 2025, and just kind of we had our fantastic subcommittees that really drilled down into nailing out some of those more specific details around the vote and the convention, but just kind of figuring out a few of those next steps. Or I'm really proud of what our national board was able to accomplish there.
So, in terms of getting more women involved in the political landscape, what do you think are some challenges that are unique to women that they face when they're trying to be in politics, and how do we overcome it?
The problem itself may not be specific to women, but I think the extent of, especially when it comes to social media or threats or nastiness to elected officials online. I know it's not exclusive to women, but I think the tone of some of the threats and harassment that are especially directed at women elected officials is something that's really concerning. And speaking with other women, it is something that is if we're speaking honestly, it is a concern, or maybe not a barrier, but to some people it is to putting your name forward or stepping up to the to run for elected office. Whether you're just campaigning or if you're successful in getting elected into that role, and I think everybody acknowledges that criticism and healthy debate around the issues is one thing, but personal attacks or certain like derogatory name calling is certainly another thing, and it's unacceptable. But I think or finding the extent of some of that, or harassment, or some of that commentary that gets directed at women, and we see it in all, I should say, many fields. It's not just in politics, but I think if I'm looking at when I talk with women in my circles, what are things that prevent them from stepping up to put their names forward? That's definitely something that they think about. Or am I willing to have that directed at me, or and my family sometimes, especially if they have children or partners, or it's it's a politics really is a family affair, right? Or it's if you have close family members. And so that's something that comes to mind. And thinking of family, I think our Liberal Party has been a real trailblazer in coming up with some of these family focused policies that have made it easier for women to think, be in a position where they can put their names forward. But I think about, childcare responsibilities, or or not even just childcare, but elder care or family care responsibilities. Or I know of so many incredible women who are already so involved in their communities on boards or volunteer positions. And it's sometimes it's so funny to think about the people who are the most qualified for the positions. Or we know so many women who would think oh, well, I don't know if I'm well qualified because all I do is volunteer in the community in so many different ways. Or or they think they don't see what they do as leadership or as qualification. And getting them to change that, the way they view their or their their accomplishments is something that I think we're continuously working on as well. But when I think about maybe some of the main barriers, that when I'm speaking with women in my circles about what's keeping them from getting involved or more involved in politics, those are some of the things that come to mind.
So then, what do you think is we can do just as, society or even from the party perspective to get more women involved? So not necessarily as a candidate, but just getting involved, and especially in leadership roles like what you're doing.
It's $1 million question, and I think, or it's something we're constantly trying to strive towards and figure out and readjust our approach to. I think as a woman who isn't not an elected official but involved in politics in the Liberal Party, kind of what I have been trying to do myself is to reach out to women that I know or who I think would be who are great involved members of their community and who are great advocates, who I think would be great elected officials, or just great to have as involved members of the Liberal Party of Canada. These are the kind of people we want sitting on the Women's Commission or on showing up to our commissions to vote on policies or putting forward policies as part of our submission process. These are we want to hear their ideas and have their energy at the table. And so just reaching out to them, or when we have, whether it's local fundraising events or things, speakers or events locally that I can invite them to, a little bit easier, or when you're in a little bit further from places like Montreal or Ottawa or Toronto, where it a lot of, to be fair, a lot of our Liberal membership is, but it's a little bit harder for us on the East Coast to always make the trips in, and so looking forward to seeing and connecting with some of those members at the convention in April of next year. But I know especially on the local level, when we were fortunate to have Chrystia Freeland, or when she was still MP at the time, come out to PEI for a fundraiser with MP Sean Casey, and it was great to hear her chat. At the time, PEI and our provincial politics, we just had a provincial Liberal MLA elected in a by-election, and so it was great to hear Chrystia Freeland chat about how she was, first elected federally in a by-election, and chat a bit about her experience as a woman in politics. And so I think, just being willing to have those conversations, whether it's with MPs or the women locally in your circles, when you've got these incredible leaders or speakers coming out, invite them to these events. If you've got AGMs or meetings or coming up and there's going to be vacancies on the board, invite them to apply or ask them, have you thought about getting involved in politics before? And I find it always interesting when you're chatting with men versus women, how many will tell you, or to your face at least, if they've thought about getting involved in politics or not. I'm trying to equalize that number when I ask that question of what the response is. And so at least when I think about myself, what I do to try and get more women involved, and when I think about as a Liberal Party what we can do, I think that like the work that the Women's Commission is doing, or the initiatives that they're putting forward, the policies that they're advocating for, I think are some of the steps that we can continue to support and champion if we want to see more women involved in politics as well. When we have these incredible women involved in our party and putting forward policies, I think it's just going to hopefully be a self-fulfilling prophecy where we get more women continuing to be interested and involved in our party, and then hopefully running as MPs and being elected as members and sharing their experience in the House like we want to see.
Absolutely. What is the one piece of advice you would give to other women that want to get involved, but perhaps are hesitating or are just feeling unsure? One piece of advice. And it could be a piece of advice that maybe one of your mentors gave to you.
I always try to say, to the extent that is, reasonable, we're within limits, but always say yes to all the opportunities that come your way. Or if you see that there's an opportunity to go door knocking or make phone calls, or there's going to be an event where you can, even if you're not buying a ticket, but maybe you can help with registrations at the door, just like there's ways to be involved, even if you don't necessarily, depending on what what you have to give, I should say, if it's your time and energy or your funds, or there's ways to be involved. And I'd say yes to those opportunities. When if people are reaching out to you, it's because they think that you have something great to offer. And so I'd say have that. I've found even myself have it's been a great way to build my confidence. And so I'm hoping to, kind of extend that to the other women and young people and young liberals I see coming up next to me. But that's probably the biggest piece of advice I would say, or what's kind of led to, I wouldn't say success per se, but just kind of what's led me to where I am now in my extent of my involvement in the Liberal Party is just kind of saying yes to those opportunities, and are making sure it's having those supports, or making sure that I keep those connections going, and always saying yes to those chances. Those are kind of what keeps those doors open, and keeps your name in people's minds. That's probably the biggest piece of advice at this stage of my career that I would give, is just to say yes to those opportunities.
So, Madison, for any other women that are interested in getting involved with the party, especially in PEI, and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in touch?
I would encourage anybody who's listening or watching this, even if you think that you might be interested, or are interested in learning more about what's going on with the Liberal Party on Prince Edward Island, feel free to reach out to me. Probably the best way is on Instagram. If you look up Madison Ranta, just all one word, my first name, last name spelled like usual, you'll find me there. And if you want to shoot me a message, we can connect. And so I wanted to say thanks again to you, Amin, for reaching out to me to participate in this. I think it's a great initiative. And I really appreciate the work, and I think we're so fortunate to have such a strong women's commission who's here to support the goals of the Liberal Party of Canada. So thank you again for taking the time to speak with me and invite me to chat with you on a lot of these important issues that are involving women on Prince Edward Island, and federally as well with the Liberal Party of Canada. So thanks again.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for coming on here and sharing your experience. Really appreciate you taking the time.